Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio Podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada. In episode 47, we speak with real-life titan and muscle researcher, Kara Lazauskas.
I met Kara from Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. Kara, I would categorize you. You are a muscle researcher, correct?
Correct. Muscle research coordinator for the university. Already got my master's last December. So, going through the route of finishing up research and moving on.
I love it. And you were, Derek, we'll just dive right into this. Kara qualified for the Titan Games and it did pretty damn well in that, Kara. You want to kind of run us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So on the Titan Games, I, start off with a joke. My friends, one of my very good friends who I played college basketball with, she sent me a text, voicemails, all that. She's like, apply for the show. I'm applying you. You're perfect. You need to do this. I was like, this is silly. It's NBC. You know how many fanboys and girls are going to apply? Like, this isn't real life. I know entertainment works a little bit, enough to know. You know what? I'll give it a shot. Didn't take it seriously. My application didn't take it seriously. Ended up getting one call, led to the next. All of a sudden, okay, this is happening. So ended up going out, canceling my flights home to New Jersey to visit family, did the combine, went to the combine. They still had 300 women to choose from. Was like, I just canceled my one flight home to see my family for this, and they still have 300 people to choose from. I was like, oh, here we go. Okay. So we had a little fitness combine, which was nothing too crazy. Just deadlifts, Vo2 Max, which wasn't a Vo2 Max. It was just, they said it was a Vo2 Max, but it was just you on a treadmill with a heart rate monitor. And really they were just looking at how hard can you push yourself.
Right.
They called it the Vo2 Max. Then, a little interview and ended up getting the next call saying I was on the show. And it was a wonderful experience. I ended up winning out my episode and becoming one of DJ's top 8 female Titans, which was a great experience. Ended up losing in the semifinals. Which was quite the night for me. I learned a lot about entertainment in that night, that is for sure, about all the ins and outs. And it was one of those things that you always look back on as a really lovely learning experience.
Well, can you dive into that a little bit? I don't mean to throw this right at you because we do want to get to your background a little bit because I know it's very impressive, but this is interesting to me. Everything's a learning curve, and Derek and I always talk about this. It's like, you made the semifinals. You got to work next to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, which through a lot of my clients, I hear he's a tremendous human being.
Oh my God,
yeah, amazing. But could you tell us about that experience a little bit? What was a learning curve?
So the learning curve you saw, and I've said this to a couple people, and I've thought about it deeply, is you saw the best and the worst at everybody. The best and worst at everybody, because competition, and especially under those lights and in that arena, which was the biggest one ever created for athletic competition on national TV. It was, cameras everywhere. You're mic'd up. There's 20 cameras on you at all times. You either saw people break down or you saw people lift up and really show their true athleticism and who really they are. But I saw a lot of people, just performance anxiety, just, break down. You become like half therapist. And it really taught me and showed me that, how much being mentally strong prepares you just as much as being physically strong. But even under those lights, because I saw it, it was amazing to me how ginormous and surreal the structures were that they built for these competitions. On TV, it didn't do it any justice because when you saw them in person, you're like, what is this, Circus Soleil? Like, this is ginormous. Right. And you can't train for that. You just have to be physically and mentally prepared and come in with a strategy because the challenges were so large. And so almost circus-like because they're so big, and you just got to come in knowing that, I'm as fit as I possibly can be. I'm going to come in with a strategy and I'm going to rock out to the highest capacity. And I just love this environment because you either loved it or you hated it. And you saw that in everybody. And the people that loved it ended up doing really well. And Dwayne was an amazing person. And the biggest take home I got from, the Titan Games itself was the camaraderie everyone had. Everyone was exact opposite of what I went in with, expectations. Like, there's going to be a couple people that are, for themselves. And, it's entertainment. So there's going to be those, fanboys and girls, but everyone was really supportive of each other, and we still talk to this day.
So you felt like everyone was pretty genuine, and you felt like that the support, because on the TV shows you see people applauding sometimes, you just don't know how much of that's real.
Yeah, I think I heard enough applaud in the show, but because at the end of the day it's a show. Yeah, it's the Titan Games, but you got to realize it's also Hollywood. Like, a lot of people are like, a lot of people still thought because my episode aired Valentine's Day. A lot of people thought I was competing that night. I was like, no, we filmed the whole thing in September, guys. It's all right. I competed in September. It's done, but it was very interesting to, have that experience and see, the camaraderie. I mean, again, like anything in life, there was still that one or two people that were definitely for themselves. But for the most part, it was the exact opposite of what was going in mentally. The Calgary of, a-holes. I didn't get that.
What was, going into your background now, can you take us back? I mean, you're incredibly athletic. I think your profession right now is definitely unique, and I think it's really, really interesting. But can you kind of bring us back? You played basketball. Can you go through kind of your history and how you got into what you got into?
Yeah, of course. So Don and Derek, I started growing up in a wrestling family. So I actually grew up with a wrestling mat in my basement. My dad was an All-American wrestler. He was Division I coach. My mom to this day hates that I say it, but I'm exactly like, the older I get, even though I'm a female, people get confused with the short hair. It's my big joke. The older I get, the more I realize I'm exactly like my father in all of the worst and the best of the ways, because he's always been a huge competitor in life and just in athletics. And I definitely have that from him. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. It's, attack it, act first, ask questions later type of mentality. And I've learned that about myself. But growing up in wrestling, lost, as many know from the Titan Games. I have more to my story than just the one lung, but I did have a huge tumor that they call the post-inflammatory pseudotumor. So they had to take out my whole lung when I was 3.5, my left lung. So I kind of always grew up with that chip on my shoulder, I think, because of that. I think my whole life, because it was so young when that happened, I always had this subconscious mentality: if I got to prove everyone wrong, I got to do better, I got to work harder than everyone else, because I already have this, anatomically going on. So went right into sports. I was cleared at 8 years old to start playing sports. Went right into soccer, basketball, your track and fields, and just excelled from there. In high school, when I got into high school, I was told I wouldn't be able to play at a high level in basketball because I was so short, and I rode the bench in middle school. And I took that, like most of my life, as a, F you, like, no, It's not going to happen. And I essentially trained before school, after school, till 11 o'clock at night, slept and did it all over again. And, ended up starting varsity in freshman year of high school basketball, and just working my, butt off, and ended up getting, all the opportunities I could have wanted, and then tore my ACL once, twice, and then 4 times.
Oh, wow.
Even though I was cleared by FMS every time.
Wow.
Yeah, we don't want to go. I have a lot of rabbit holes in my life, but we won't go down that rabbit hole.
Well, I'm curious. What have you had your Vo2 Max tested? I'm curious.
Yes, actually, for my own study at the university, I became a subject of my own study. Had to test it again this year, and actually again last month. And I'm 47, around 47.
Okay.
So out of 3 of them, my average is about 47.2.
With one lung. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a lot of breath holds and breath work. A lot of swims underwater. It really does help me out a lot.
God, I haven't had my Max. There's a picture behind me when I was at Athletes Performance Institute when they were in Tempe. That's the last time I had my Vo2. I can't even remember what it was.
Mine was in college.
You guys should just come to the lab and have a competition. We'll just see who wins.
No, thanks.
Let's go.
I just remember doing it, and they stuck the mask on me, and I'm like, I can't breathe. I'm just standing.
Yeah, it's tough to breathe that mask on, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the worst part. For me, that's the worst part, because if you do the old school mask where they have to pinch your nose, for me, being someone who's been taught their whole life, it's better for your lungs to breathe through your nose. Like, don't be a mouth breather. And then to be forced through hard physical activity to breathe through your mouth is the worst thing you could possibly do to me. I really have to mentally lock in, like, don't, focus. Like, you can only breathe through your mouth.
Well, I heard that people are focusing more on, and I don't know if this is true or not, you're the expert in this category, but VO2 peak now and not VO2 max. The true VO2 max, aren't they like catching you off the treadmill? Aren't you legitimately like going to collapse?
That's the true standard. Yeah, you're basically collapsing off the treadmill. The problem is, and like any test that in XPhys, is it depends on who's running the test. It depends on what standards are they going by. Are they going by the true standards? Because when I was growing up, even into high school, every time I did a VO2 max at a hospital or a stress test at a hospital, I never got a true VO2 max because they would go by the standard of my heart rate. Well, my heart's bigger than a normal athlete's heart. It's over 18 pounds. It's about the estimated 19. And so my heart rate increases very rapidly, very fast. And to normal standards in a clinical setting, that's a contraindication, which means they have to stop the test. Even though I'm fine, it's my normal. But because they're going off those standards, it's not normal to them, but to me, it's normal.
So what are the standards? Because I was under the assumption it's catching the person off the treadmill when they collapse, but that's not. I never feel like getting done anymore.
No, not necessarily. Normally there's three ways we say that we have to stop a VO2 max test. For my studies, I don't go by those because I want their real max. So I'm going to essentially, like you said, Don, catch them off the treadmill or catch them. They can't pedal anymore on that bike. They're so fatigued. I want a real true one. But typically, it's three things. Either they VO2 max, they hit that plateau. So it plateaus, it's not peaking anymore. It's just kind of flatlined. It's hit that level and just boop. That's one way we'll stop the test. Another way stop the test is if their heart rate, technically you're supposed to stop it. Like I said, if their heart rate gets above their max or gets to a dangerous level, and that's all dependent on if you're in a clinical setting, in a lab, how they'll do that. So if you just use the basic 220 minus your age, well, we know that's highly inaccurate.
Yeah, of course.
So some people will do that though, and they'll stop the test. And I've gotten in fights with people doing my view. It's like, no, like don't stop the test.
No, don't stop. Yeah.
And then the third one is if they can't move anymore.
So can you do me a favor, just for our listeners, would you mind explaining VO2 max?
Yeah. So VO2 max, just essentially when you hear that word or you hear that, see the symbol VO and then a little 2 at the bottom, max, it means your maximal oxygen consumption. So how much CO2 to O2 can you push out? The thing is if you, say for the listener's point, if you see any abstracts or any studies or anything pushed out, be very wary when you look at that because there's a lot of problems with research. There's a lot of good and bad things in anything, but if someone says they're doing a breath by breath measurement, we know that's highly inaccurate. So what they essentially did is they just looked at every single breath they took throughout the whole test. And they just took whatever one was the highest out of those hundreds of breaths and said that's their VO2 max, which is highly inaccurate because we have it's got to be an average. So what you want to look for is the 15-second average. That's the most accurate. So the point of a VO2 max is it goes in stages. Typically what's done is when you either go on a treadmill or a bike, you technically can do it swimming. They actually have apparatuses now. And each stage, either the watts or the treadmill speed increases. And essentially you have this mask on. There's two versions. Old school, you look like you're in the apocalypse and you have the nose plug. Or you have the typical, what most people associate as the elevation masks. If we've seen those in Dick's Sporting Goods and all the sporting goods stores around, the elevation mask. It kind of looks like that, the 2019 version. And then you're just going to full exhaustion. You're pushing the stages every 2 minutes. Some studies will do every 30 seconds. The stage increase, it gets harder and harder and harder till you cannot perform on the treadmill or the bike or swimming anymore.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question. Have you done the bike test versus the run test in the same individual? Is there much variability?
Yeah. Okay. So.
And then Lance Armstrong, the runner versus the cyclist, right?
Yep. So one thing I tell every single person that walks in the lab, like off the bat, so they feel better about themselves, number one. Number two, so they have like that one, tip is your VO2 max for majority people, unless you're Lance Armstrong, unless you're a cyclist. And I've had velodrome Olympic cyclists in the lab, and their VO2 maxes on the bike are just totally abnormal, like off the charts. Is on average 6 to 12% lower on a bike, so doing a cycle VO2 max versus a treadmill. So if you're on someone who cycles often or goes on the assault bike, even the assault bike really is not the same as a lab bike, two different animals, you can expect your VO2 max is going to be significantly lower than it's going to be on a treadmill. So we always know it's going to be, for most people, it's going to be higher on a treadmill, your VO2 max. So it's much harder to get a true VO2 max on a bike, especially if you're not used to a bike.
What does that mean for exercise? And if somebody wants to improve their VO2 max, would they be better picking running or versus cycling, or do you make those distinctions?
It really depends also, though. It's really interdependent on the person. So if someone comes in and they have been cycling, or they come in and they haven't been running, they have joint issues, joint pain, biomechanically, you watch them even walk and you're like, okay. I would put them on the bike just because their mechanics are so thrown off that we're not going to get a true one anyway on the treadmill, because we're just compounding an injury. And I'd rather have them develop and do multiple VO2 maxes learning on the bike than put them in a bad position on the treadmill and have faulty mechanics and have maybe exacerbate that joint pain, because now we're placing them on a treadmill. So it really is dependent on the person. Typically, I do most of mine on the bike just because, not only for safety, but we do a lot of muscle biopsies on the outside of the leg, or the vastus, I want to get sciencey, vastus lateralis, outside the leg. That's all that means. And leg fatigue is a big factor on the bike, and I want to make sure they have nice, strong legs and they're able to push through that fatigue. Where on the treadmill, that's not going to be so much of a factor. It really is independent of the person, which one's best for them. And if you're in a perfect world and you have the Woodway treadmills and they have great mechanics, then yes, treadmill. But depending on what you're doing, sometimes the bike is the best bet, because a lot of people, especially with the assault bikes now being so common, they just like being on the bike. So if they're comfortable with that, if they're comfortable with that, I want them the most locked in, dialed in, and whatever mode works for them best, that's what we're going to do.
Well, the bike would appear to be safer, I would think, especially if you're trying to push to that max limit. Now, take a perfect athlete, and this is, God, I mean, I get this question asked every day, and I always roll my eyes. What's the best cardio? What's the best mode? It's like, come on. But if you took a perfect athlete, someone who's injury-free, everything is spot on, you're choosing the treadmill as your modality?
Depends on what type of athlete we're looking at.
Yeah.
We're looking at a cyclist, or are we looking at a marathon runner? If it's a marathon runner, I'm putting on the treadmill every time, because. Oh,
well, obviously, but what if this is athlete neutral? They don't bike, they don't run, but you're screening them, everything's spot on. They're just one of the best athletes you've ever worked with. Do you have a favorite?
It's gonna be the treadmill.
Yeah. Okay.
It's gonna be the treadmill. I like to use the thing is if I see someone with, and I've done this before, they come in and they're very athlete neutral, as you said, Don, and they have huge legs, I'm gonna put them on the bike, because the leg fatigue is not going to be a factor. They'll be fine. But if they come in and they're athlete neutral and they got super skinny legs,
right.
I'm going to put them on the treadmill, because that's going to be truer of what their capacity is.
Right.
They can do.
I'm assuming you do like a rowing ergometer test for rowers specifically too. Could you do? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we have different rowers. We actually just got a new watt rower as well in the lab, which has been fairly interesting. To test and look at the differences between, what you see in the gyms, the concepts versus these watt rowers. They definitely have a bunch of differences, because it's one of the few rowers I've rode on that when you stop rowing, the calories still go because it has airflow.
Muscle biopsies. So how often, I can see you right now. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here, but how often, now you have your guinea pigs that you're performing this on, but how many times have you muscle biopsied areas from your body?
6.
Painful.
6.
Is that painful recovery? Like, what did you do exactly? Can you walk us through it?
Oh yeah, of course. So people get scared because for your listeners' point of view, do not YouTube muscle biopsies because what you'll get is the med school version. Which we do is actually called a puncture biopsy, which means we're in there with a needle about this long. And it looks long, but it only goes in about this much. So we normally go at the outside of the leg, like I mentioned before. And it's only going to be about a second that we're actually in there. So it feels like a Charlie horse, actually. That's the best way to describe it. But, you know, Dr. Galpin, who I work with, Andy, he likes to say it feels like a biopsy. Yes, true. But I like to think of it as, you know, having a few now, and I might be getting a few more in the next month. It feels like a Charlie horse, like a millisecond, second at max Charlie horse. Just that weird pressure, like I think of it like cupping and acupuncture together. That weird, and then it's done. Before you recognize it's in, it's done. So it's technically called a puncture biopsy, and we take about a eraser-sized amount of muscle. So in one of those eraser-size, you know, amount of muscle, there's hundreds of fibers in that one single bundle. And then we'll go through a process. We'll put it through, you know, a couple of different solutions. And then we'll go and isolate it. And each of those bundles has hundreds of fibers. And then we'll go through the process of analyzing that athlete's fiber type. So it sounds really aggressive when you say biopsy, but what we're doing and what makes the most sense is puncture biopsy is much different than the med school version. Very quick. You can work out the same day. So everyone's different. Some people participants I've had or athletes, they're sore for a couple days. You know, kind of, it feels more like you had a really hard leg workout for some people.
What are you looking for?
We're looking for is, well, it's dependent on the research, but for the most part, we're looking for your fiber type, muscle fiber type composition. So everyone, slow twitch versus fast twitch versus, you know, there's also hybrids in the human body. So how many hybrids you have percentage-wise versus these pure, you know, slow twitch, fast twitch. And then we also have mega fast twitch muscle fibers, which are technically in the research called 2X fibers, which has been very interesting because there seems to be a spectrum of, on two opposite ends of the spectrum of who has 2X fibers. So if you're just an average athlete, you tend to not have any 2X fibers, these mega fast ones. But if you're a UFC athlete, you have a decent percentage of 2X, you know, decent meaning like 5, 6, 7%, where no one has anyone that they're just like a regular, an average athlete, average human. And then you see on the opposite end of the spectrum, diseased patients, and they have 2X fibers. So I'd like to think about it this way. If you're really diseased, just in atrophy, just the process of getting up is an explosive movement for you because you're so atrophied and so diseased. So just for them sitting up is explosive versus the opposite end of the spectrum, UFC athletes, for them, everything they do is mega explosive and they need those 2X fibers. So it seems to be, especially that fiber type, the mega fast, I love it when everyone gets pissed. Like even I got pissed when I got my fiber type. I'm like, man, I have those 2Xs. Come on, I thought I was an athlete. You know, I thought it was super explosive, but I'm not. It's like you're either super elite or you're super diseased to have these 2X fibers.
Yeah, like spinal cord patients, injury patients, they convert to fast twitch, right? The areas that aren't innervated, right? So, yeah. Do you find much variability per muscle group? Like if I go hamstrings, quads versus calves versus low back, like what are the difference in proportions of slow to fast?
It all depends. All depends, again, like I said, on which area, Derek, but the calf, we're going to expect think about it this way. A muscle that you use to stand and walk all day expect the calves. You're going to have a much higher percentage of that slow twitch or type 1 muscle fiber type. In science, we call it myosin heavy chain. So if you just see MCH in anything, that just means fiber type. In the calves, it's going to be more slow twitch. Where in the quads, especially in weightlifters, especially in powerful athletes, you're going to see a lot more of those 2 ways. Or resistance trained, you're going to have a lot more of those 2 ways. So if you're resistance trained, you're going to have more 2 ways in your quads and your hamstrings. Shoulders, arms, there's very little to no research in biopsies in that area. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of nerves. There's a lot of risk doing a biopsy because get asked all the time about, what about if you biopsy swimmers and look at their delts instead of their legs?
Yeah.
Well, that's a huge risk on athletes because there's a lot of nerves. There's a lot of, arteries. It's very hard to get a correct biopsy there without putting the athlete at risk. So that's something eventually we'd like to do on, people who aren't about to have their dreams on the line. But for the most part, we do outside the leg VL biopsies.
Are there alternatives?
So it all is
Are there alternatives to doing biopsies? Like I've used electrical stimulation at different frequency bands to figure out, fast twitch versus slow twitch. Have you compared some of those things to different methods?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So really the different method is the biopsy. There is no different method. It's the biopsy itself.
Okay.
So really the biopsy itself is what's going to tell us the biggest story. What makes, it's so interesting is there's so little research at this capacity, even in the last 10 years. So that's even big reason I moved across the country to first get my master's here and work in this lab, is because when I looked at what was going on and what Dr. Galpin was doing in the lab, I realized that up until, 10 years ago, no one was even doing this method of analysis, doing single muscle fibers. Up until then, if you look at research in the 90s, if you look at muscle biopsies back then, they were analyzing it for something called, versus DNA. And it was grossly overestimated what your fiber type percentage was. So they were looking at the whole bundle itself and kind of guesstimating what was going on, versus now we take each individual fiber and now we know this is the accurate method. It's actually called SDS page, which just means we use a lot of buffers and go through a whole 15.5-hour process, or, it takes a while, but it gets us the accurate information we need. But it hasn't been done. So really, to your notion, Derek, looking at it different realms and looking at different modalities, we haven't gotten to that point yet in research to start even testing different ways of biopsying, because we have so much more to go in just this method alone of single fiber typing.
Wow.
Done back in the day.
Once you, and obviously I know to an extent the answer is going to be different, but when you retrieve this information, how are you handling with that? I mean, what do you want to call them? Patient now? I mean, technically they're a patient. If you're removing muscle from their body and you're in your biopsy, yeah. I mean, they are technically a patient. So when you're dealing with this patient, I mean, this is obviously someone who's not, your average gym goer. This is someone who's elite, who might be looking for that edge. Are you just handing the research to them and saying, go to your coach, go figure it out? Or are you actually sitting down with them and figuring out a plan of attack?
We actually are sitting down with them. So we have a whole athlete's report that we curate, a nice, beautiful, colorful report that we go through in detail and simplifying the explanation, because anytime someone walks into the lab and they get a biopsy and, their first question is, well, what does this mean for me? How is this actually going to change my training? How am I actually going to change my lifestyle? Because we know your fiber type composition, the health of your muscle tissue, is dependent not just on your training, but your nutrition, on your sleep, your hormonal levels. It's affected by everything. So we try to really sit them down and give them a whole report of, this is what we analyze, this is what we saw. For your sport or for what you want to do with your life, this is how we would go about changing your training, changing your lifestyle to get the desired change and adaptation you want for the health of your muscle tissue to perform better for what you're doing.
Are you always following that? I mean, just think about this for 1 second. It's something where when you go and you find out your exact fiber type and you find out the exact way you should be training, does that mean throughout the year you're never throwing in a level of variability where you're kind of going against the grain and against the fiber? Are you always sticking with that?
We always go, you always want to go have some variety. You always want to add some spice. So a lot of time, this happens a lot, especially with weightlifters. It's about to be published. It's very close. When we biopsied, and, Nate Serrano, who was the lead on that, we did the whole, for the majority of USA weightlifting, women and men. And that was the first ever study done. So the first ever study done on strength and power athletes purely. And it's crazy because every single one of them are like, well, should I change drastically and keep it that way all the way up into the Olympics? No. You still have to have some variability because your muscle tissue itself doesn't change that drastically just because you added some spice to it. It takes a couple months. And I always love when everyone wants the magic pill. Everyone wants to say, like, oh, if I change it, I actually got this question yesterday from a patient, and a new client of mine was, well, if I just do X, Y, and Z, can I change it in, say a month? I was like, no. Right. This is a consistent change we can expect. And just over the years of the research, what we say now is in as little as 3 months, you can expect about a 10% shift in your muscle fiber type. So it's a slow, gradual change, but it has to be a consistent change. But it doesn't mean you can't add variety. Just because you decided to do, some metabolic conditioning or, ride the bike instead of lift that day does not mean your muscle's going to say, oh, I'm going to be all slow twitch now. It doesn't occur that way. It's a slow change. Does
the research stop with training, or do you guys start diving in? I mean, I know Dr. Gabrielle, who you're very good friends with, does a lot of blood analysis, whether it's saliva or stool testing. I mean, are those things that you're finding yourself diving into as well, or is it just?
Yeah. Actually, it's really cool stuff. I mean, we're actually just got 3 of the new grad students. I just trained how to do all this process. We just got the grant, and we're going to start a whole study looking at in my study, we looked at something called AMPK, which, so no one throws a hissy fit. AMPK, what it is, and this is the easiest way to describe it to people without getting really biochemistry, is AMPK. It's why fasting got popular, and it's why most doctors now, at least functional medicine doctors, tell type 2 diabetics to start working out instead of taking the drug metformin. Yeah. It's all because of this molecule AMPK, which is very associated. If you don't eat, basically AMPK is high, helps your cells turn over. We're not going to do a study with mTOR, so protein synthesis, which I know, Dr. Gabrielle has been on talking a little bit about mTOR and protein synthesis. And we're going to look at also poop samples. So we're going to look at your gut with resistance training and these biopsies and see in healthy, trained individuals, resistance trained men and women, what is going on. What's the association between your gut and your muscle fiber type, which has not been done to the capacity we're about to do it at yet.
What's that? I'm sorry, you just broke up. Did you guys freeze?
I didn't freeze.
No.
I'm sorry. Something just happened with my computer. Can you ask me that again? That was a weird thing. That never happened. This whole thing, I think the whole screen on me froze, but you guys were still going. Weird.
Oh, yeah.
What was that?
Oh, so I was saying, we're talking about different, like looking at muscle tissue and then adding on different components. With my study, we actually looked at a time course, post-HIIT training, so hard rounds on the bike, like full exhaustion. And we were actually looking at nutrient timing in males versus females based on your fiber type.
Right.
It's already been, until it's published, I can't say anything, but it's been very, very, for the first time ever, very conclusive that there's biological difference between men and women when it comes to your post-workout nutrition. We're starting another study where we're looking at now poop samples versus your fiber type in resistance-trained men and women. And then also looking at a molecule called, a protein called mTOR, which Dr. Gabrielle has touched on. And it's basically, in simple terms, it's the opposite of AMPK. You eat, mTOR is up here, it helps you build muscle. Mm-hmm. Don't eat, AMPK turns on, helps you rejuvenate cells.
So how often are you personally fasting? Is that something that you throw into your regimen occasionally?
Oh yeah, 100%. I throw it in because I do still train, not as much as I would like to now, but I still train. When I could get, like yesterday, I got my half hour in, just went hard. I still like to fast every day for at least 12 hours. At least get the 12 in. Typically, I'll do one, sometimes twice a month, where I'll do on a Sunday, I'll do a 24-hour fast. Just because of what, especially doing the deep dive into, fasting and looking more and more into it, is that much better for longevity and health, just to put yourself through that suck every once in a while. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you just feel that much better the next day. I don't recommend, if you're a full-time athlete and you're training hard and you're going, 4+ hours every day, you shouldn't be fasting at all, if very often, unless you're skipping that morning training session and you're going to just eat more of the calories later on in the day. You're going to make up for it.
All right. So when do you start counting that fast? Because there's different theories on this. Like you mentioned 12-hour fast. So like, is that, and I've got my theory on this, but is that, well, I just finished my last bite of my meal at 6:59 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I'm not eating again till 7 a.m. the next morning. Are you counting that as a 12-hour fast, or are you counting the 12 hours from the point where you feel you're almost digested 2 to 3 hours?
Yeah, that's a great point. I like to do it from the point where you feel like you're digested, because what a lot of people associate with fasting is when I stopped eating, that's when the fast starts. But your body doesn't work that way. Your body, when it first ingests the food, then it goes through a whole process based on what you ate, how long it takes for it to actually be in your bloodstream and go to working muscles, go to, working tissue. So if it's fat, so if you had a high fat meal, it takes 7 to 9 hours for that to be fully digested. So to have a 12-hour fast, well, you technically didn't even digest your high fat meal last night.
Right. So so you're probably looking, if it's in the evening, it's probably more towards that whole intermittent fasting protocol of 16 hours. Is that kind of where if you're saying 12, is it really 16? It's
really 16.
Yeah.
It's really 16. I say 12 in regards to kind of the normality of when I've stopped. Yeah.
And I totally get that. And I respect that answer. I'm just curious because there's been so many different theories, and when you ask different nutritionists, they're giving different answers, but I never consider a fast like, oh, well, it's 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I haven't eaten. So that's a 12-hour. I'm like, well, that's not really a 12-hour fast. It's probably more like a 6 to 8 hour fast.
Well, I have 6:59. I've gotten this comment before, and I actually had someone the other day text me a picture of what they're eating. Because I sometimes, for accountability reasons, I'll do it. There's way better nutritionists than me. I'm just ISSN. I'm not. Trust me, I love to refer out. I always talk about staying in your lane. Know what you're good at, and know when you got to refer. And I had someone the other day text me their meal, and I was like, it's a lot of fat. It's not a fast that you eat again tomorrow morning.
Right.
And you have a jar of peanut butter.
I actually feel on occasions when the eating's really good for a period of time and you've mixed in maybe some high carbohydrate meals, which I like to do, I actually feel a little more energetic when I throw in a period of fast when I train.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like if I wake up and I'm like, no, listen, I don't really like the whole, I'm going to eat like shit and then turn around and, well, that's an excuse. Now I need to fast. I'm like, nah, I don't really like that. I'm like, well, let's detoxify the body with healthy nutrition. Let's get everything working the way we want it to work, responding, hormones, everything functioning properly. And then down the road, let's throw in a fast when you feel like you can handle it. When you almost like, I almost go by like, oh, I don't feel like eating, or I'm not hungry, or like, then I might go about doing it. I actually feel great.
Yeah.
I actually feel like my body gets tighter, my brain functions good. That's my theory, but I don't know what your thought process on that is.
I 100% agree on that. And the first thing that popped to my mind when you were speaking upon that, Don, is that's a clear sign of not only yo-yo dieting. Fasting is not a Band-Aid. And in this Western world, we have turned intermittent fasting into a Band-Aid to our real problems. Fasting does not fix your problems. If anything, it makes you hungrier than the next day because you just eat like crap. And coming from someone, a big piece of my story that is the elephant in the room that no one likes to share is I dealt with an eating disorder. I dealt with anorexia. I was in a hospital for 3 months. Right. After my 4th ACL surgery, I went basically bat crazy, went off the Richter because I didn't know who I was. So I turned to food to control it. So I'm very keen on the behaviors as someone who's, recovered and dealt with it. I'm a mentor for a lot of people coming out of the hospital. I work a part of a program and I hear it all the time. Well, I ate like crap yesterday. Like you said, I'm going to fast today. I was like, that's not healthy. That's not healthy. It should be part of your healthy lifestyle, not a Band-Aid to your real problems.
I agree. And you know what? I feel as, listen, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm passionate about nutrition. I would never claim to be a nutritionist. People just ask me advice, and I give what I can give until it crosses that line of, oh, you need some real help here. Let's say that's why I have 2 nutritionists working at it drop. But I feel like this advice turns into a weapon. And when someone becomes known as the keto guy or the fasting guy, I feel like it's really a weapon. And though I do believe there is some value to that, I like looking at statistics of general pop. Who are the people listening to you? What percentage of the people listening to you should really be doing that? Mm-hmm. If you take, I don't know, I'm going to throw a name out there who's a big keto person, this guy, Thomas DeLauer, and I don't even know if he's a nutritionist or not. He does a lot of social media. But if he's telling everyone to do, and I don't know the guy from a hole in the wall, I'm throwing that out there because I'm trying to make an example here.
Oh, yeah.
If he's turning around and he's saying, well, ketogenic, I think that's really dangerous. I feel like as a fitness professional, a practitioner, whatever he wants to refer himself as, and I'm going to throw rocks at him a little bit right now. I feel like for him to turn around and to advertise that as the be all end all, and to sit there and to paint that picture as I have my shirt out. This is how I look. This is how my brain functions because of this. You should be doing this. You should be doing this. You should be doing this. You're not taking into consideration so many other variables that are so important to determine before assigning because he's not a doctor, he's not prescribing, assigning a diet to an individual. And 9 out of 10 times, I got to be honest, I think the people getting on this stuff, they do not have the right to be stepping into that area. That would be done by someone who is healthy and understands their body and might be experimenting for the right reasons, not using it as a fat loss anecdote or, as a means to drop water weight in a period of time because they just got back from Vegas. What's your thought process on that?
I 100% agree. And that is my biggest frustration, why I'm so careful with social media and all that, and really make it a point to make sure people know I'm not a nutritionist. I am not, and I'm not in that space. So if you ask me, what is the best diet for me, I'm going to say, what works for you? Because on social media when I see it, and I think of 10 names in my head right now. I'm keto, I'm this, I'm vegan. I love the vegan question. I love it. And I'm like, where's your, no, not everyone should be vegan. Just because you're vegan and it works does not mean you should be vegan. And the research is pretty clear that, especially with the keto stuff, the ketogenic diet, the paleo, I'm actually going to Paleo FX in Austin this year for the first time, and I'm very curious about the conversations that are going to come up. And it's pretty clear that after 3 months, especially with females, there's decreasing effects. There's deleterious. Woo.
Good word.
Great, big word. I'm so in the science field.
I love it.
That's all these big words get to me sometimes. That's why I'm not a PhD in biochemistry.
I love it.
After 3 months, there's no positive performance effects on being a ketogenic diet. And I coach in the summer for an organization called Point Guard College. And we always have a nutrition module. And they always have, me speak upon it. And I always make it a point, these athletes that are 15, 16, 17, that if you want to make a huge change, do not go to me. Find the proper nutrition coach. Find someone has this, doctorate, has this certification. Do not, and I saw this actually quote the other day and I thought it made perfect sense. If you're going to someone who recovered from an eating disorder who just got a cert online from a nutrition coach, do not take advice from them. You shouldn't be going to someone, that's not someone that's going to give you the right, because they're going to be biased. They're not going to give you the right answers. Now, necessarily that's not always true, but when I heard that, it made perfect sense to me. All the people who recovered, just for my experience too, it was funny. People love to get information, like you said, from the people on social media, Instagram, and think that that's the way they have to go because that person looks good. It's not. Every diet is so interdependent on the person.
Well, I'm going to ask something right now. Quality control, because one topic I think, Derek, you and I have brought up with almost every single guest. And we brought some smart people on who have taken a lot of pride for decades. I mean, we just had Al Vermeil on, who, Derek, how long have you been in the business for, in the training business?
Oh, geez, I don't know, since the 60s and 70s, who knows, yeah.
I love those people. I love them.
No, it's great because he's not a, he's not a highly, I don't want to say, he doesn't come off as a highly technical person, but He knows training. He knows the human body. He's worked with some of the most impressive athletes on the planet. How do we, how's there becomes a level of quality control now? Because social media has gotten so out of hand. You're someone that takes a lot of pride. Derek's someone I obviously look up to in the industry. He's become known as one of the best running coaches on the planet. Your people, these are people who have really, really put some effort into this and take a lot of pride and love into their craft. Mm-hmm. How do we, and I don't want this to become a war between like the good guys and the bad guys, but in a way there's a lot of misinformation. And how do we kind of uphold to this standard of quality control? How does someone out there listening to us know, in your opinion, who they should be listening to or they shouldn't be listening to?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing is that in this society, in this world, the information is all over. You could go down any rabbit hole you want by just a quick Google search. I don't think there is a such thing as any of us collectively being able to have quality control. What needs to happen is being able to find the right mentors and the right people. And when you're searching out someone and someone's giving information, say Instagram's pretty, it's what I use probably by far the most. So I'll use Instagram as an example. If you're going on Instagram and you see someone, proclaiming this is the right diet or this is the right exercise or do this, not that, do your due diligence, search that person, see what their credentials are, see what their background is. And if they don't have that online, or if that's someone that's saying, anyone who says this is for you and this is the only thing you should be doing, let's put it this way, you should run for the hills. Because anyone that has that amount of a bias, that's our quality control right there. Anyone who says that this is the one and only way and this is what you should be doing, run away from that person. That's how we control this. It's going to still happen. It's just part of society. Everyone's got their opinions. Everyone's got their status and their biases. But anyone who says that there's only one way and this is the way you have to do it, that should be a red flag right away that you need to run. And that is not the person you should be following.
It's really a simple formula. It really is a simple formula. It's probably the one answer that everyone has given on the show and they've been completely consistent with.
I had one question, Kara. Based on your ACL injury history, what kind of guidelines or what kind of word are you putting out there for young athletes in terms of prevention? Mm-hmm. I mean, you'd mentioned you passed this test and this screen, but what do you think should be done for kids, maybe even specifically females, mm-hmm. who are at risk for this?
I think the biggest key is, number one, this first one's very simple, is you are not, if you're a young athlete, unless you're 6'8" and 200 and something pounds like LeBron James, why are you wearing LeBron James's shoes on the basketball court? And Derek, you're one of the best, running coaches out there. I'm sure you can attest to this. If you are a bigger body type or a smaller, you should not be in someone who's a completely different body type's shoes. Same thing with basketball, soccer. I see kids, because they're stylish shoes, wearing professional athlete shoes when they're not their body type, they're not their stature. And we know everything starts from the ground up. So if you're wearing, first of all, shoes that are not specifically made for you, you're already causing an issue starting with your feet. Number two is that making sure that athletes, I use my story and use, what happened to me as a platform to show these athletes, what happened wrong in my life and why I didn't get to live out my professional career. I didn't get to play overseas basketball because I listened to I thought listening to my doctors was the right idea, but I was with the wrong practitioners. I was with people who told me, didn't look at movement patterns, didn't look at movement quality, and just said, well, you're an athlete, you're fine, you're cleared. Well, I tell athletes all the time, just because you're cleared does not mean you're ready to play. You're just insurance-wise cleared. So making sure athletes realize that an ACL injury, and they made this rule in the NBA now, you have to be out for a year. ACLs technically for the ligament, regardless if you're strong or not, you should be out for a year. You should be developing proper mechanics. You should be getting especially females, much stronger in your inner thighs. I love it when I see it. This happens every summer, especially with the 14-year-old, ladies. They're like, man, I just, how do I prevent ACL injuries? And I show them one exercise. I have them lay on the ground, work on a belly breath, and they have to squeeze a basketball or a foam roller between their legs for about 30 to 50 reps until their inner thighs start to burn. Typically, they start burning around 10. I was like, that's an issue. That's how weak your inner thighs are. And think about every time in any sport you're cutting, anytime in any sport, you're doing any explosive movement. If your inner thighs are weak, especially as a female, we got the wide hip angle, you're causing a ligament stretch, excessive stretch every time you cut. Over time, that's going to compound. So you need to get every part, not just because your quads look good or your hamstrings look good. We know the glutes are super important, but if your inner thighs aren't strong, especially if females, you're waiting for an issue. You're waiting for some complication to start occurring, an injury to happen. So those are kind of my three things. With males, it really comes down to, teaching them, or really teaching any athlete, the habit of finding the right professionals, doing your due diligence. The information's out there. I know every 12-year-old has a phone. They have iPhones. It's showing them the way and showing them the right professionals to start seeking out.
I love it. Kara, listen, I mean, it's been almost an hour already, and I can keep going with you. We can keep going with you right now. First off, Derek and I want to thank you because I know Derek just met you, but, you and I, I feel like I've really gotten to know you well over the last couple months because of Dr. G. And I just want to say I consider you a friend, and thank you for coming on here. It's really a privilege to be able to listen to you. Could you let our readers, can you let our listeners know if they want to contact you, if they want to follow you, what are the best platforms?
The best platform is my website's up. It's karakilian.com. The Kilian was with one L, so Kilian. So Kara Kilian, Kara with a K. Very simple. You can also follow me on social media. Instagram is on the most. I've gotten a lot of direct messages. I get a lot of questions, and please feel free. Do not hesitate to reach out to me on there. I'm not one of those weirdos that won't answer your question or deny it. I love it. It helps out. Yeah. And on Instagram, I've gotten a lot of jokes about this, but I refuse to change my Instagram name. It is Killer K0, KILERK0, just because that's been my nickname for years, and I've had it that way. I'm not going to change it. A lot of people change it to Coach Kara. I'm like, no, everyone's got it. No, I got to change it. No. My name, I'm sticking with it.
Coach Derek, I love it. Listen, Kara, thanks for coming on. I got to bolt. Derek, thank you. Love you. And
thanks, Kara.
I'll see you in New York. And maybe when I take a trip out your way, we could do some Vo2 testing.
Biopsy is biceps.
Biopsy my ass muscle.
Biopsy the glutes. Let's do it.
See you guys. Thanks.
Guys.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Awesome.